Senators Bernie Sanders and Lindsey Graham went head-to-head in a live Fox Nation debate moderated by Bret Baier yesterday. Ahead of the debate, Baier said, quote, "It's really exciting. You can't think of two senators who are more ideologically split apart." Sanders called out Graham for being part of the establishment. Surprise, surprise. Let's take a look at that.
What you don't hear him talking about are, in fact, the most important issues facing this country. That's what the establishment does. Lindsey is a very good and effective representative of the establishment. Does Lindsey have a concern that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people? That some 60,000 people a year die because they don't get to a doctor on time? I didn't hear much about that in that opening statement. You got three Wall Street firms now, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, who control $20 trillion in assets. They control hundreds and hundreds of corporations throughout this country. Bottom line is we are moving toward oligarchy.
You know, it feels good, I gotta say. The left, I will say, has a lot of criticisms from Bernie at this point. There's a lot of frustration. It's not exactly the rah-rah coalition that existed back in 2016 or even 2020. But to hear just someone go on TV and talk top down instead of left right, and to not just say they're not talking about the important issues and then pivot to something like, in Trump's 1-6 response, he says that they're not talking about the important issues. The elites don't want you to talk about important issues, and then talks for 12 pages about 1-6 himself. It's nice to hear someone who seems to be talking in good faith about mass wealth aggregation at the top of the pie, about the fact that wages are in decline, that we are the wealthiest country in the world that doesn't have healthcare access for everybody, that whether or not you can get treatment is contingent on how much money is in the bank, and all of these really basic human rights issues that frankly the majorities of Americans agree about. It felt like a flashback in the best of ways to me. I don't know. How did you feel about it?
I think we are night and day on this issue. I mean, it always really, really bothers me when I hear people like Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez talking about the need for universal health care, and not means tested, universal health care, things we sort of attempted to do in a piecemeal manner with Obamacare. But they're not actually properly identifying the culprit, the real problem at the heart of this, which is employer-tied healthcare, which is something that we started in the 40s.
Oh, Bernie talks about that all the time.
He does a little bit, but that's not the solution that he ultimately, he doesn't propose the solution explicitly of we need to unbundle healthcare coverage from employment, which I think would be a much easier partisan lift. That's a much more agreeable point.
That's literally Medicare for all. That's the whole point of it. And one of the things that he advocated for when he did his Medicare for all debate.
It's unbundling these things plus making universal health care, right? It's a two-step thing that Bernie's advocating for.
If we got rid of employer-based health care, how would you imagine people?
Glad you asked. Absolutely. I mean, a total marketplace for people to be able to shop for insurance plans that fit their needs. And as well as, I think this could be something that really forces some transparency. You actually have there's a surgery center in Oklahoma. This is like the most dorky libertarian thing ever. There's a surgery center in Oklahoma where they have a la carte price list, and you get to know exactly how much your surgeries are going to cost, and you get to budget and plan accordingly. And if
I'm poor, if I don't have any money.
Well, the good thing about this is that the prices are actually so much cheaper than you would actually find at a standard hospital, because you go to a hospital and you ask, how much is this procedure going to run me? Could I at least have an itemized bill? And they say no in a lot of cases.
But what if I
don't
don't have any money?
Well, I mean, yes, that's why you buy your insurance on the private marketplace, and that allows you to be able to shop and to decide what type of
The concern is that people can't afford insurance.
Yes, but I mean, they can't afford it right now. Absolutely.
Right. Well, but here's the concern, Liz. 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency.
Yes.
We're in a country that has a lot of folks concerned about declining birth rates. A lot of people specifically are concerned about declining white birth rates. That's their bag, not
that's
mine.
a whole other thing, right?
But the point of the matter, even if that is you, not you, but even if that is what some viewer is concerned about.
How do you know my baby's white?
Even if that
I don't even know.
It's such a trip. But even if that were your concern, I don't understand how we can have a country where people are, pro-life, where they want people to have the ability to give birth, and at the same time, it costs thousands of dollars to have the simplest thing in the world, the most natural thing in the world, like childbirth. I had someone call, and I do a call-in show the other night, and I had a caller from South Africa call and ask, like, really concerned, hey, just some clarification on your healthcare system. You're telling me that if I injure myself or if I get cancer, and I go into the hospital and I just happen to not to have any money to my name, I'm like SOL, like I'm just up the creek. I'm trying to come up with an expression that have cursing in them, but they all have cursing in them. But I'm just up the creek without a paddle. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I explained to him, in fact, in America, some people come out of the hospital with these huge debt burdens just from giving birth. And he was stunned into silence over it. What do you make of that?
I make of that. I think people on the left really discount and for whatever reason almost aren't willing to entertain the idea that creating a private marketplace like we do for so many other industries, right? Like the most bloated industries with the least pricing transparency are like far and away college tuition in this country and medical, like the amount that we pay for medical services. And so I look at these two issues and I think, look, like what is the common thread between them? Because neither of these are things that I'm happy with, right? They're huge problems and they affect almost everyone. And I look at what the common thread is and I think, oh my God, there's a ton of bureaucratic and administrative bloat and there's not very much transparency. Well, hold on. And there's not very much transparency in terms of how much we pay for these things. We don't actually understand fully, here's the service being rendered and here's how much it costs to provide this and here's the cut that this institution is taking. And the way that these institutions, especially hospitals, are enabled to do this type of thing is because we have this system of crazy intermediaries as opposed to actually, like I cannot go to Lenox Hill where I'm going to be giving birth and ask them for, an itemized list in advance of giving birth for how much different procedures will cost me so that I can budget. And I'm somebody who can absorb those costs. If the medical bill ends up to being way higher than I anticipate it being, I'm somebody who can handle that. A lot of people are not in that same economic situation and cannot do so. And I want them to be empowered to be able to do so. And I think that will drive prices down across the board.
So you're right that 15 to 25% of all healthcare costs are administrative waste. It's also true that in countries that do have universal healthcare systems or nationalized healthcare systems, they pay less for healthcare and they get full coverage. Unlike us, we pay twice as much.
What do you mean by full coverage specifically?
They go to the hospital, they don't have to pay.
And
they pay obviously upfront out of taxes. So the idea is we are all paying healthcare premiums, insurance. People are paying at the emergency room. Hospitals are absorbing these care for emergency procedures for people who don't have health insurance. The total healthcare spending in America per patient is twice as high. Twice as high in some of these other countries, despite us not actually getting the coverage we want. So we have a lot of people who avoid coverage.
We charge people extra and then we fail to deliver. We deliver half as much.
Right. And so a lot of the cost, to your point, is because of these private intermediaries. It is the administrative cost of having to do billing and also the profits that are going to the healthcare industry. I
don't think it's fair to fully categorize them as private intermediaries. One of the big problems that we have in this is that we have so many different players. We have pharmaceutical companies. We have hospital administrations. We have insurance companies. We have the premiums being negotiated between insurance companies and hospitals.
That's absolutely part of the problem.
We have physicians who are frankly they're handsomely paid in this country. I think that's an interesting sort of line of questioning to go down.
I think that's do they deserve as well, especially since a lot of that is motivated by their high student debt burden. So all of these things, I completely agree, are intertwined, and there are some fundamental problems there. But you can't look at this problem of people not being able to afford health care and say the answer is to have people just pay out of pocket without the support even. I'm against.
But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying dismantling, unbundling employment and health care and having a private insurance marketplace where people can shop for plans legitimately, because that's so different than what we have.
Employer-based health care is pernicious because it forces you to have to rely on an employer to get support for health care costs that for most people without an employer are basically unsupportable. So I don't think the answer is to get rid of employer-based healthcare, which is support for people to contribute to the financing of their employment without having someone else to support them in their ability to pay for insurance. So I agree that it's a silly system to couple it with your employer because obviously when you get sick, your employment is compromised. That's exactly the time where oftentimes you aren't able to work. You're getting treatment for sometimes something that is very grave, or you're home with your baby or whatever it is.
That's a grave condition. Becoming a mother is a grave condition.
Well, sorry, you know what I mean.
No, it really is. It sounds depressing.
But the point of the matter is, and again, this isn't something that is especially controversial these days. I'm glad to say that the majority of Americans agree at this point that just like we have Social Security, just like
which is terribly managed, by the way, and maybe
because Republicans have intentionally defunded it and tried to basically have funding requirements, advanced funding requirements for it in a way that no other spending program does, so that they can fearmonger about there being these debt cliffs periodically and make people feel like it's not a sustainable program when it really is. And we can go into that, and Bernie Sanders has talked ad nauseum about that as well. But I challenge you or any, conservative, libertarian, anybody to try to attack Social Security. Joe Biden tried at one point, Barack Obama tried at one point, and the public outcry is huge because people rely on these kinds of programs. People rely on Medicare, and though there are substantive criticisms of it, it is also one of the most popular, if not the most popular government program there is. And before we had it,
right?
Old people were dying in the street.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Social Security and of course Medicare are popular programs, right? Like any situation where, especially one of my big issues with Social Security is the degree to which it's not means tested. So, I mean, what we have is we have wealthy old people who have been saving for their retirement for years and years and years, who now get handsome checks from the government.
I agree.
When we're in a situation
tested in the other direction, because people who are very affluent, there's a cap on how much you pay into Social Security.
Absolutely.
And more wealthy people should be paying into it, and that would help resolve some of the funding issues as well.
It seems like we have a fundamental difference of opinion in terms of the federal government's competence at managing and administering these programs, and so that definitely leads me to wanting people to have more choice and more ability to go and seek these options out on the private marketplace, because I just look at the degree to which this is unfeasible in the long term.
I don't think we have a difference in the competence of the government. My concern when I'm talking to conservatives and libertarians is that they want to talk about the critique of the government, which I'm happy to talk about. They never want to talk about the fact that the private industry is what's driving a lot of the corruption and the lack of transparency, the inability to negotiate with drug prices. That's all lobbying efforts from the private industry, not the government's doing.
I think it's really important, as I mentioned before, to sort out all of the different stakeholders and all of the different components here, because to just cast it all as public malfeasance or private malfeasance is really missing part of the picture, and a huge thing that contributes to these absolutely enormous costs, which I think we both agree are way too high and impossible for people to really prepare for, are the fact that there are so many different stakeholders engaging in all kinds of different, sometimes very malicious tactics in order to drive up prices or in order to pull the wool over consumers' eyes to make it so they don't actually know how much they're on the hook for. And I don't think that allowing
the private sector to have carte blanche reign over exploiting people for profit is the way to get the profit out of the healthcare system. This was illuminating. I know we could go on and on, but the producers are in our ear telling us we got to go. But we will have more rising.
We'll do another segment soon.
We definitely should. We'll have more rising for you right after this.